The universe's greatest assassin feared no one, until she met a human single dad, a HFY story. In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the sprawling empires of countless species, there existed an assassin whose reputation was etched into every corner of the universe. She was known as Nira, the Silent Blade, the one who had struck down kings, warlords, and entire factions without leaving a trace. Fear had followed her like a shadow. There were whispers in the darkest corners of space, stories of her unmatched skill, her ability to vanish without a sound, her precision that left no room for error. She was a being of legend, a creature whose name alone could send even the bravest warriors into a cold sweat. No one, no species, no being could escape her, until she encountered something she had never expected, a human single father. It had all started on the distant world of Nyx-4, a planet that had remained neutral in the galactic war that raged between the great factions. Nira was sent there on a contract, tasked with eliminating a minor criminal who had sought refuge on the planet after crossing several powerful syndicates. To her, this job would be as easy as any other. She had done worse in the past, this would be a mere blip on her endless list of assignments. But what she didn't anticipate was the presence of a human, a single father who had recently moved to Nyx-4 with his young daughter. He had no connections to the criminal she was hunting, no reason to be a part of this at all. Yet fate had drawn them together in the most unexpected way. Nira had been watching the target, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike, when she saw the man and his daughter walking through the market. The man, named Marcus, was a simple mechanic, a survivor of a terrible war on Earth. He wore the scars of his past, but his eyes shone with a quiet strength, an unshakable determination that intrigued her. It was the way he held his daughter's hand, his protective posture, the way he smiled despite everything that had been thrown at him. For the first time in her life, Nira hesitated. Humans were nothing like the other species she had encountered. They were fragile, weak by galactic standards, yet they had a remarkable resilience, a tenacity that could not be ignored. Marcus was no different. As she watched him, she felt something stir in her, something unfamiliar. Was it admiration, sympathy, or perhaps, for the first time, a crack in the armor of her cold, detached heart? She couldn't say for sure, but the more she watched him, the more she couldn't bring herself to follow through with the contract. Her target, the criminal, was still on the loose, but she found herself distracted, torn between her duty and an inexplicable pull toward this human. One evening, as she tracked her quarry through the dark alleys of Nyx-4's capital city, Nira encountered Marcus and his daughter once more. They were walking home from a nearby park, laughter echoing in the quiet streets. It was a peaceful scene, one that seemed so out of place in the chaos of the universe. Nira stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as she observed them from the shadows. She didn't know why she did it, but she followed them, staying hidden. There was something in the way Marcus interacted with his daughter that moved her. She could sense the love he had for her, the way he would do anything to protect her. Nira, who had killed without a second thought for most of her life, couldn't understand it, but she found herself caring about these strangers, something she hadn't expected. Days passed, and Nira found herself unable to complete the mission. Every time she came close to pulling the trigger or landing the final blow, something would stop her, his laugh, his smile, the way he spoke to his daughter with such tenderness. She had never seen such raw, untainted love before. It was a stark contrast to the cold, calculating assassin she had been bred to be. It wasn't long before Marcus noticed something strange about the shadows that seemed to follow him. He had heard rumors of assassins, of people like Nira, and he wasn't stupid. One evening, as he walked home with his daughter, he turned around and faced the darkness, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he kept hidden under his coat. "I know you're out there," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. Nira froze. How had he known? She was a master of stealth, no one had ever detected her before. Yet here was this human, a single father, with a sense of awareness that surpassed even the most trained soldiers. "I'm not here to hurt you," Nira said, stepping into the dim light, her voice as calm as ever. "But I was sent to kill someone, a criminal, and yet, I can't bring myself to do it." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his grip on his weapon loosening slightly. "You're an assassin?" "I was," Nira replied, her gaze unwavering. "But for some reason, I find myself conflicted." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and continued walking, his daughter by his side. He didn't flinch, didn't show fear, and he certainly didn't run. "Then maybe you don't have to kill," he said softly, without looking back. Neera stood still, her mind racing. No one had ever spoken to her like that, no one had ever dared. She had killed without remorse for so long. Yet here was this man, a simple human, challenging everything she had ever known. She couldn't explain it, but something in his words resonated with her. The assassin who had once feared no one suddenly found herself questioning everything. The universe's greatest killer, who had brought entire factions to their knees, was now standing in the shadows, questioning her purpose. And perhaps, for the first time, she understood what it meant to be truly human. The next day, Neera left HFY. The criminal was still at large, and the mission remained incomplete. But something had shifted in her. She was no longer the same killer who had once feared nothing and no one. She had met a man who had taught her something she had long forgotten: the power of love, the strength of family, and the possibility of redemption. As for Marcus, he would never know how close he had come to death, but his quiet strength had left an impression on the greatest assassin the universe had ever known. And for that, Neera would never forget the human single dad who had saved her from herself. The universe's greatest assassin feared no one, until she met a human single dad. A HFY story continued. After leaving HFY, Neera's life took a turn she had never expected. For the first time, the coldness of her profession seemed unbearable. She had spent years as a weapon, a shadow that moved through the galaxy unseen. But now, every dark corner, every silent movement, felt empty. The thrill of the kill had faded. No longer was there joy in the hunt. Only a growing discomfort, a gnawing sense that perhaps she had been chasing the wrong thing all these years. She wandered through the galaxy for a while, hiding in plain sight, taking on menial tasks, trying to find a new sense of purpose. She had destroyed countless lives, toppled governments, and erased threats, but now she questioned the cost of it all. Could someone like her ever find peace? Could someone like her be more than just an assassin? It was in the quiet of her self-imposed exile that she received a transmission, one she almost didn't open. It was from Marcus. "Hey, Neera," the message began, the voice of a man she had barely known but could never forget. "I hope you're doing okay. My daughter and I were talking about you the other day." "Well, more like I was talking. She says we should invite you over for dinner sometime." "I know, it sounds strange, but maybe it's the human thing in me. I'd be glad to see you again. No pressure." Neera sat in the dark room aboard her ship, staring at the message for several long moments. The galaxy had never seemed so small, and yet, she realized, for the first time, she had a choice. She could ignore the message and continue her lonely existence, or she could try to walk away from the shadows that had followed her for so long. The decision was made in a heartbeat. She landed on Earth, a world she had never been to before. Earth was a blue and green speck in the vastness of the universe, full of humans who were unlike any species she had encountered. As she touched down in a quiet suburban neighborhood, she was struck by the simplicity and warmth of it all. The trees, the houses, the little homes filled with families, things she had never truly understood. Marcus's home was small, humble, but it exuded warmth. As she approached, she noticed the well-tended garden, the cozy porch where a single chair sat, waiting for someone to sit and rest. The front door opened, and Marcus stood there with a small smile, holding his daughter's hand. "Hey," he greeted, his voice full of kindness. "You made it." Neera stepped forward, unsure of what to say. She was a killer, not a guest. Yet, here she was, standing on the doorstep of a human who had unknowingly changed her life. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Marcus said with a slight chuckle. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the scent of something delicious filled the air. The little girl, Sophie, Neera remembered, was playing with a toy on the floor, her innocent laughter filling the house. Neera had seen many things in her life, but the atmosphere here was different. The air was thick with something unfamiliar to her: love, comfort, belonging. It made her feel uneasy, like she didn't deserve it. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wanted to belong. Marcus led her to the table, where a simple but hearty meal was laid out, nothing extravagant, Just the kind of food a human family would enjoy together. As they sat, Neera felt a strange tug in her chest. She had spent her life avoiding attachments, pushing people away, and now, here she was, sitting in the presence of a man and his daughter who seemed to have no fear of her, no hesitation. "You know," Marcus said between bites, "I wasn't sure what to expect when I met you, Neera, but I knew there was something different about you. You didn't seem like a typical assassin, and maybe that's why you stood out. You're not just a killer, you're more than that." Neera looked down at her plate, her hand gripping her fork tightly. "I was trained to be nothing but a weapon. I was bred for war, for death." Marcus shook his head. "Doesn't matter what you were trained to be, it's about what you choose to be now." For the first time, Neera realized that Marcus wasn't just offering her a place at his table. He was offering her a second chance, an opportunity to break free from the chains of her past and become someone new. As the evening wore on, the tension in Neera's chest began to fade. Sophie had asked her questions about the stars and the strange ships Neera had in her possession, and Neera found herself answering in a way she never had before, with a tenderness she hadn't known she was capable of. The little girl's curiosity was innocent, free of fear, and it made Neera feel human. It made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, connection. When the meal ended, Marcus offered her a place to stay. "You don't have to go," he said simply. "We have plenty of room." Neera stood at the threshold of the door, unsure. She had never allowed herself to get close to anyone. It was dangerous, and she had always known that the moment she did, she would be vulnerable. Yet, standing here with them, she felt the walls she had built around herself start to crack. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost foreign to her, "for everything." Marcus nodded. "I'm glad you're here, and if you ever need a place to go, well, we're here." Neera looked out at the night sky, her mind swirling with possibilities. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a weapon or an assassin. She felt like a person, someone who could choose her path, someone who could make a difference. The universe was vast, and it would continue to turn, full of danger, intrigue, and death. But Neera had discovered something far more powerful than anything she had ever known. She had found a family, a human family, and in their warmth, she saw the possibility of redemption. She wasn't the universe's greatest assassin anymore. She was simply Neera, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. As the stars shone down above her, she realized that the greatest battle wasn't against her enemies, it was against the loneliness that had plagued her for so long, and for the first time, she was ready to fight it. The universe's greatest assassin feared no one, until she met a human single dad, and in that meeting, she discovered that even the fiercest killers could learn to love. The universe's greatest assassin feared no one, until she met a human single dad, a HFY story, continued. The weeks that followed Neera's arrival on Earth passed in a blur. For someone who had spent a lifetime operating in the shadows, slipping in and out of the underworld with deadly precision, it was strange to find herself living in such a normal, peaceful environment. Her life had been defined by danger, chaos, and isolation. But now she found herself waking up to the quiet hum of a suburban neighborhood, the sound of birds singing outside, and the sight of a little girl's toy scattered across the living room floor. It was nothing like the cold silence of her old life, and at first, she wasn't sure how to handle it. But she soon found comfort in the small routines of everyday life. Marcus and Sophie welcomed her without hesitation, and over time, Neera began to find herself growing attached. She helped Sophie with school projects and joined Marcus in fixing up old machines in his modest garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was human. Marcus often spoke of his past, his experiences during the war on Earth, and the pain of losing his wife. He had never fully explained what had happened to her, but Neera could sense the deep sadness that lingered in his words. Still, there was strength in him, an unshakable determination to be the best father he could be to Sophie. "You don't have to be perfect," Marcus had told Neera one evening after a long day of fixing a malfunctioning ship part. "You just have to show up. Be there for the people who need you." Neera had paused, a wrench in her hand. For a moment, she couldn't quite process the weight of what he was saying. For years, she had thought of herself as a tool, a weapon, a tool that was used and then discarded. But here was a man who saw something in her, who didn't care about her past, only about the person she was becoming. Marcus was showing her the possibility of redemption, a way to rebuild her shattered identity. But Neera's past wasn't something that could be easily erased. Her reputation as the Silent Blade still lingered, and though she had made a conscious decision to leave her old life behind, there were always those who would remember the name that had struck fear into so many. One evening, as Neera was sitting on the porch, watching Sophie and Marcus playing in the yard, her calm was shattered by the sound of a ship descending from the sky. Her instincts flared. Without thinking, she stood up, her hand already reaching for the concealed blade she always kept by her side. The ship's engines roared as it touched down in the yard with a heavy thud, and Neera's eyes narrowed. She recognized the insignia on the ship's hull. It was the symbol of the Veridan Syndicate, a criminal organization she had once worked for. A rush of memories flooded her mind, cold, calculated assassinations, contracts carried out without hesitation. The Veridan Syndicate was a shadow from her past that had been hunting her ever since she turned her back on them. Marcus and Sophie didn't notice the ship at first, too caught up in their game. Neera's hand clenched around the blade, her heart racing. She couldn't allow them to get caught up in her mess. She had come here to escape violence, to start a new life, but it seemed the past wasn't ready to let her go. The door to the ship opened, and two armed figures stepped out. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, and then they saw Neera standing on the porch. They froze for a moment, recognition flashing in their eyes. "You," one of them hissed, pointing a blaster at her. "You're the Silent Blade. We've been looking for you." Neera's body tensed, but she remained calm. She didn't want to fight, didn't want to hurt anyone, especially not here, not with Marcus and Sophie so close. But she knew the Syndicate didn't care about her new life. To them, she was just a tool to be used, a resource to be reclaimed. "Get back inside," Neera told Marcus, her voice low but firm. Marcus hesitated for a moment, confusion flickering across his face. "Neera, what's going on?" "Just go," Neera urged, her gaze flicking toward Sophie, who was now looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Please." Without waiting for another word, Neera moved quickly, stepping between Marcus and the approaching Syndicate operatives. She didn't want to put them in danger, but there was no time for a peaceful solution. She could feel the weight of her past bearing down on her, demanding action. The two operatives raised their weapons, but Neera was already moving. In the blink of an eye, she was on them, her blade flashing in the sunlight. One of the men fell to the ground with a gasping breath, his weapon dropping to the grass. The second man swung his blaster toward her, but Neera was faster, disarming him with a swift motion and knocking him out cold with a precise strike to the neck. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. The tension in the air hung thick as Neera stood, panting slightly, the remnants of her past scattered at her feet. She had killed before. It had always been easy, natural, but now, in the quiet aftermath of the violence, she felt something new: regret, guilt. Marcus and Sophie stood frozen in the doorway, watching her. Sophie's eyes were wide with fear, and Marcus's face was set in a hard line, his hand tightening around the doorframe. Neera's chest tightened as she saw the fear in their eyes. This wasn't what she had wanted. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. "I'm sorry," Neera said, her voice low. She felt an unfamiliar lump form in her throat. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want you to be a part of this." Marcus stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving her. "You don't have to apologize. You didn't bring them here. You were protecting us." But it was Sophie who spoke next, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Are you a hero now, Neera?" Neera looked down at the little girl, her heart heavy with the weight of the question. A hero? She had never seen herself as one. She had never thought of herself as anything other than a killer. But now, as she stood here, trying to protect the people who had given her a second chance, something stirred inside her. She could protect them, keep them safe. Perhaps, in this moment, she could be more than just the Silent Blade. "I don't know," Neera said softly, her gaze drifting to Marcus, "but I'll try." Marcus nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That's all anyone can do." And in that moment, Neera realized that perhaps redemption didn't come from avoiding the past, but from facing it and choosing to move forward. She had been a killer, but she didn't have to be one forever. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just an assassin, She was someone who could protect others, someone who could be more. She was starting to see that being human didn't mean being perfect, it meant learning, changing, and above all, choosing to do better. As the evening sky darkened above them, Neera stood tall, no longer the universe's greatest assassin. She was Neera, someone who was learning to be a hero, one step at a time, and she would fight for the family she had found, the family she never thought she deserved. And this time, she would fear no one, except, perhaps, the loss of the life she had finally found. The universe's greatest assassin feared no one, until she met a human single dad. A HFY story continued. In the weeks that followed the syndicate's arrival, the atmosphere in Marcus's home shifted. What had once been a quiet, unassuming household was now brimming with an unspoken tension. Sophie, ever perceptive, asked fewer questions but often looked at Neera with a mixture of wonder and wariness. Marcus, too, seemed to keep a closer eye on her, his easy smile from earlier replaced with occasional moments of concern. Neera knew what was coming. It was only a matter of time before the syndicate sent more after her. The galaxy didn't forgive, especially not someone who'd turned their back on a powerful organization like theirs. The peace she had found in this little corner of the universe was fragile, more fragile than she cared to admit. But no matter how many times she tried to convince herself to leave, to disappear again and continue her journey through the stars, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Every time she thought about leaving, about walking away from Marcus and Sophie, a part of her rebelled. She had chosen this life, they had chosen her, and for once, she didn't want to run from it. One evening, while working on one of Marcus's old ships in the garage, Neera's instincts flared once more. A familiar sensation swept over her, the feeling of being watched. This time, it wasn't a passing feeling. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she knew with certainty that they had come for her again. Her hand instinctively reached for the blade at her side, but before she could even stand, Marcus appeared at the garage door. His eyes were hard, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. Neera, they're back. I know, she said quietly, her voice calm despite the storm brewing inside her. She didn't need to ask who they were. The syndicate had returned, and they weren't going to stop until she was dead. Marcus stepped into the garage, his hand on the doorframe. I can't let you face this alone. You don't have to. You can't be involved. Marcus, Neera interrupted, her voice harsh. She took a step toward him, lowering her tone. Softer now. If you stay here, if you try to help, you're putting yourself and Sophie in danger. I won't let that happen. I'm not leaving you, he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. You're not alone in this. You're a part of this family now, and I don't care who's coming for you. You're not facing this alone. Neera's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever chosen her. Not after everything she had done. She had always been a shadow, an entity that others feared or avoided. But Marcus had chosen to stand with her. Before she could respond, Sophie appeared behind Marcus, her small face painted with worry. What's going on, Neera? Neera crouched down to the girl's level, her eyes softening. You need to stay inside. Sophie, it's not safe out here. But why? Are they back? The bad people? Neera hesitated. There was a part of her that wanted to shield Sophie from the harsh reality of the world she had come from, to keep her innocent and untouched by the violence that seemed to follow her. But there was also a part of her that knew Sophie wasn't entirely unaware. Children often saw things more clearly than adults realized. They're here because of me. Sophie, Neera said quietly, her voice steady. But I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. Marcus stepped forward, his hand on Sophie's shoulder. We'll be okay. You've kept us safe before. Neera, we're a team now. We do this together. Neera looked between the two of them, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't explain. A team. It was such a simple concept, yet it was so far from anything she had ever known. But the thought of facing the syndicate alone, of leaving them to handle it without her, felt unbearable. She took a deep breath. All right, but stay close to me. Do not go out of the house unless I say it's safe. Understand? Sophie nodded, her eyes wide, but trusting. Marcus gave her a nod of approval. We'll follow your lead. The decision was made. Together, they would face this. Neera quickly moved to the backyard. where she had hidden her weapons and gear. She wasn't the same assassin who had once operated in the shadows of the galaxy, but the skills were still there, buried beneath the layers of the person she was becoming. She wasn't just a killer anymore. She was someone who would fight for what she had. She would fight for them. The first sign of trouble came an hour later, when two sleek ships descended onto the property. The syndicate wasn't being subtle this time. They were sending a message. "Stay inside," Nira told Marcus and Sophie as she ducked behind a tree, her senses sharp, her muscles coiled. She was in her element now, focused, precise. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw set. "I'm not leaving you. I told you to stay inside." Nira's voice was sharp, but she knew it wouldn't make him go. Marcus had never been one to listen when it came to protecting those he loved. The ships landed softly in the yard, and the doors slid open with a hiss. 4 operatives emerged, trained, deadly, and completely unaware of what they were about to face. The leader, a tall figure in black armor, stepped forward, his voice carrying over to Nira. "Silent Blade," he said with a cruel smirk. "Did you think you could just walk away from the syndicate? You've killed too many of our people. Your time is up." Nira's eyes flashed. The old bloodlust surged within her, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. She wasn't the same cold killer she once was. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for a future. "Leave," she said, her voice calm but full of authority. "Now, before you regret it." The operative's laugh was short and mocking. "You think you can stop us? You think they can help you?" The mention of Marcus and Sophie made Nira's heart race, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step forward, her body tense, her mind calculating. "I'll make you a deal," she said, her voice low. "You walk away, and I won't kill every last one of you." The leader's eyes narrowed. He raised his weapon, but Nira was faster. In an instant, she was on him, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. The first operative fell with a gasp, his weapon tumbling from his hand. Nira moved like a shadow, her movements fluid and deadly as she took out the next 2. Marcus and Sophie stayed inside, watching through the window, their hearts in their throats. They could hear the sounds of the skirmish outside, the quick, efficient strikes of Nira's combat style, the sounds of syndicate operatives falling one by one. When it was over, Nira stood alone in the yard, breathing heavily but unscathed. The once feared syndicate operatives were now sprawled across the ground, unconscious or incapacitated. She had won, but it was the price of something much more valuable than just victory. Marcus stepped out from the house, his voice shaking but full of gratitude. "You did it." Nira nodded, her gaze softening as she turned toward him and Sophie, who had cautiously joined him. "It's not over yet," she said quietly, "but I won't let them hurt you. Not ever." For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had a family now, one she would fight for, protect, and cherish. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Nira realized that her greatest battle was not against the enemies of the galaxy, but against the fear of what might happen if she ever lost them. This was her new life, and she would fear no one, not even the past that still hunted her, because now, she had something worth fighting for.